Hi everyone, my name is Elizabeth Jacobs and I'm excited to discuss my article presentation with you. I have chosen Why Leaders Should Embrace Employee Motivation, written by Christine Comaford in the Forbes article. I will be discussing why motivation is important, why leaders should motivate employees, and how does this article relate to Chapter 20. So to begin, why is motivation important? Well, motivated employees can lead to increased productivity and allow an organization to achieve higher levels of input. Let's think back, for an example, what an employee would be like who isn't motivated at work. They will most likely waste time and resources and may be a distraction to others, therefore decreasing productivity. Most employees need motivation to feel good about their jobs and to perform well. Motivation levels within the workplace have a direct impact on employee productivity for this reason. Workers who are motivated and excited about their jobs carry out responsibilities to the best of their ability. Therefore, production numbers increase as well. As you can see on the right, I have listed several reasons why motivation is important, and I will discuss them. So, to begin, interactions. When employees are motivated, they're excited to work. They're excited to build relationships. They're excited to see their performance. So they want to work. Thus, they're more willing to develop a rapport and trust with managers. Commitment is when people are motivated to work and they are genuinely want to put forth their best effort. Satisfaction is also important. It's especially important to organizations and companies because it can lead to positive growth if employees are happy. Efficiency is kind of self-explanatory. However, motivation and efficiency are not entirely related to abilities and qualifications. To ensure companies get the most out of workers, employees need to have a decent balance between the ability to perform and the task given, and the willingness to want to perform the task job assigned. So later in the presentation, when I discuss theories, I'll be talking about the when and the how as well. So on to the second objective. Why should leaders motivate employees? For this objective, this is really where the bulk of the article comes into play. And as I keep going through the presentation, I constantly reiterate motivation is directly related to performance because I think it's so important that we grasp this concept. So hopefully as I go on, you will understand why. Leaders should demonstrate a commitment to employee happiness. This is not to be confused with letting employees just do whatever they want. However, happy employees are productive employees. So according to the article, only 2 in 10 employees strongly agree that their performance is managed in a way that motivates them to do outstanding work. That's really concerningly low. 30% of employees strongly agree their manager involves them in a goal setting. So employees whose managers involve them in goal settings are almost 4 times more likely than other employees to be engaged. So I think here what's critical is employee engagement in goal setting and planning, therefore motivation follows after. And there was a quote in the article that I thought was interesting. Empowerment and performance happen when people solve their own problems. So being self-reliant also is a lesson in motivation here as well. Christine Comaford also comments that motivation plans generally generate clarity and insight. Therefore, when managers and leaders create a plan, this leads to motivation, she says. Employees need to feel valued and they need to feel that their opinions, their comments are being heard and they're important in the organization. So how does this article relate to Chapter 20? Well, per our text, motivation is the central issue that pervades all aspects of employee behavior. The question of how leaders motivate employees has been asked for many, many years. And our text also writes that classical economics argued that because work was an irksome activity or a dreaded, or people didn't want to work, they had to be coerced and compelled to work hard. So I want to also talk about the theories related to motivation as well that were developed in the 1960s. So this is just a fun little pictures I found. The first one being all of these positive things stemming from motivation: growth, job satisfaction, responsibility, recognition. I think it's just so important that we recognize motivation, because a lot of us struggle, I think, in our jobs, in our daily lives, trying to juggle and balance all of our responsibilities, that sometimes we forget each one requires a certain amount of motivation and a certain strategy to continue being motivated. So theories that led to the discussion of motivation. Vroom's expectancy theory, I'll be discussing that, Adams' equity theory, and Lawson Latham's goal setting theory. So to begin with Victor Vroom's expectancy theory, it was noted that this is the most influential motivational theories of the time period. And it's really related to the article because, if to think back to the slides, motivation is directly related to performance. Again, I said I'd be constantly reiterating that, because as people want to maximize their rewards, they need to put in the effort. They need to constantly see that they're getting something for what they're doing. And I think that's normal in human nature. You want that recognition. You want to see that people are acknowledging your hard work. So basically, I know we've gone over this in class. The expectancy is the effort, externality is the performance, the balance is the rewards. So our book states that motivation to behave in a certain way will be the greatest when individuals believe it will lead to certain outcomes. So when you feel they're being compensated adequately, then they will work, to the greater good of the performance. So, in theory, if the individuals trust their leaders to recognize their efforts towards outstanding work environments are more positive and more open. So it really goes back to my first point that performance really thrives off of motivation, and leaders really, really need to implement motivational strategies towards employees. So next one being the Adams theory in regards to motivation. This theory attempts to explain satisfaction with outcomes and to predict changes in behavior. So basically, it defines motivation as the perceived equity between the effort one puts in and what one receives. I believe this theory is more of a measure or a comparison, but I still felt it was relevant to motivation in the article. Again, I think it's normal and human nature to have, to compare ourselves to coworkers, friends, significant others. But, I think the dangerous part of this is when we are comparing ourselves to other successes when perhaps we haven't achieved those successes as well, and we feel we should be compensated for our own, even though they don't measure up. They may, and they may even exceed, but I think there are 2 points to understanding equity theory. Perception and equity is not equality. So I think for a lot of times, employees and managers lose sight of this. Employees feel entitled to raises, promotions, etc., when they haven't put forth the motivation and they haven't been following, the manager's incentive plans, implementation strategies, or leaders are failing to provide constructive feedback and incentive plans or even communicate effectively. Therefore, motivation is minimal. I believe there are situations where employees are not treated fairly, and I understand that this theory really kind of highlights them. But for the sake of this presentation, I'm kind of sticking with motivation and why it's important to employees. However, if employees are not being treated fairly, it would certainly disrupt the status quo and eliminate the trust and rapport with managers. Leaders should be conscientious of equality versus equity, as Adam's theory indicates. Compensating an employee who has been undeserving or isn't good for collaboration, group motivation, and morale. So fairness does, I feel, impact motivation and employees, which also is why I feel this theory is relevant to this presentation and this article. So the goal setting is extremely important, as Christine Comaford states. She states there's a positive relationship between setting goals or plans and motivation. So this theory explains how goals can be used to regulate and improve employee performance. So as previously stated, leaders who make a plan or set goals see a direct link in the motivation of their employees, whether the goal be incentive-based, recognition or reward, self-motivation strategies. The possibilities are really endless when it comes to motivation. It's almost compared to like when I make a plan for my day with my daughter. Even if it's something as little as writing down, the goals and objectives of the day, crossing them off really, gives me a sense of accomplishment. So, ultimately, I think the responsibility to motivate lies with the leader and the employee. I think motivation is clearly important in an organization. So just to conclude, again, motivation is directly related to performance, and motivation is key to an effective workplace environment. Without that sort of boost of morale, without that constant kind of reassurance that employees are doing a good job from leaders and from their peers, I feel, the performance, it does decrease. Secondly, leaders should embrace motivation as it provides employees with a chance to build trust with managers and coworkers and open the door to open communication. Without that constant rapport and without that feedback and that building that relationship, it becomes difficult for leaders and employees to have a solid relationship. Happy employees are motivated employees. I mean, that stands true of anything. If you're happy at something, you feel good about what you're doing, you know what you're doing, you're confident in your skills, you've been given a clear outline with goals and insight, then you're going to be successful at what you're doing. Lastly, motivation leads to increased desire for reward. So you're doing a good job. You want to be compensated for it. And I love this quote by Maya Angelou: nothing will work unless you do. Without hard work, you can't expect to reap benefits. So I hope you liked my presentation. I hope you learned something from it. I hope if you have any questions, please comment below. Thanks so much.